What's up, everybody? Thanks as always for supporting the show. It would mean a lot to me if you would take a second to scroll down and hit that subscribe button to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel, and then follow me on social media on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter so you guys don't miss any of our content over the course of this season. All right, let's talk some basketball. All right, I want to move on to the Golden State Warriors and Jonathan Kuminga. So the Warriors lost a heartbreak game to the Sacramento Kings last night. Shout out to Harrison Barnes, who was incredible in that particular game. Shout out to De'Aaron Fox, who took over the game down the stretch. But there were several key mistakes down the stretch from Steve Kerr, I thought. I want to point to one particular one. There was a sequence where the Warriors were only down by one in about the middle of the fourth quarter, and a timeout was taken, and Steve Kerr decided he wanted to buy Jonathan Kuminga some rest, I think. And it was clear that's what he was going to do because Jonathan Kuminga was playing a great game. But Kuminga had only played 26 minutes up to that point. So I remember being like, why does he need rest? He's 21 years old and he's played 26 minutes. Like, the kid's fine. There's 6 minutes left in the game. You need him out there. So they go into Dario Saric instead. And Harrison Barnes was on fire and they put Dario Saric on Harrison Barnes. I'm like watching the TV. I'm like, this seems like a disaster waiting to happen. And ironically, it wasn't even Barnes. Barnes was actually cooking Klay Thompson down the stretch. But there was a transition cross match when it was a 1-point game. And again, a transition cross match is like anytime there's some sort of like chaotic transition possession, the defensive principles change from, guarding your matchup to guard the nearest guy. Like that's the principle of those are the principles of transition defense. Sprint back to the basket, fan out to the nearest guy. Basket first, then nearest player. And everyone just kind of guards anybody because it's more important to avoid those like wide open shots that you can give up in transition than to give up a mismatch, right? Which you might be able to double and rotate out of, right? So in this particular play, it's a transition cross match where De'Aaron Fox is bringing the ball up the floor and no one's there to guard De'Aaron Fox. And so Draymond Green and Dario Saric in classic transition, they're already back. They're communicating to each other. Draymond points Saric to pick up De'Aaron Fox. And so he does. And De'Aaron Fox, just his eyes light up. And Saric is kind of panicky and backpedaling, which, by the way, is Saric's job in that position. It's like you're already compromised by virtue of this mismatch. At least make him take a jump shot, right? But De'Aaron Fox just settles into like basically what amounts to a wide open pull-up three. He hits it. He celebrates on his way down the floor. And then the very next possession, he hits another pull-up three against Brandon Podziemski. And like, I'm a big believer, like I was talking about earlier as it pertains to the Knicks, these kinds of things are intricately connected. And like, I don't even think De'Aaron Fox attempts that second three over Brandon Podziemski if he didn't just make the same type of shot over Dario Saric. And so that substitution to get Kuminga out of the game to bring in a player who is completely overmatched defensively under any circumstances, I thought was a driving force behind how they dug themselves in a little bit of a hole. Because now all of a sudden you're down 7, right? You're down 7 with not a lot of time left. Then you bring Jonathan Kuminga back and you battle all the way back, right? You end up taking the lead and you're up by 1 with less than a minute left, and there's a baseline out of bounds play. By the way, which was really interesting. They went with Kuminga, Wiggins, Draymond down the stretch of the game, and in those last like 4 minutes, and like theoretically that should be a pretty athletic group that can rebound, but like the Kings got several key offensive rebounds on that final possession, ending in Steph kind of landing on the floor and getting an out of bounds call. And Steve Kerr doesn't challenge it. They come in out of the baseline, out of bounds. And Kevin Huerter and Domantas Sabonis just run like a basic, like kind of flare screen action headed towards the corner, the strong side corner where the inbounder is. And so basically, Huerter's at the top of the key. Sabonis comes up and sets a pick. Huerter runs to that strong side corner. Steph is guarding Kevin Huerter. Draymond's guarding Sabonis. Steph dies on the screen. And when he dies on the screen, Draymond then gets put in a predicament. He can either go guard Kevin Huerter or he can stay home and concede that shot. Now, in the event so Draymond decides to run after Kevin Huerter. Now, what you're supposed to do in that situation is when that switch takes place where the big screen defender basically runs out to the guard has to do what's called a peel-off switch, where he basically peels off of his man and basically decides to box the big man as far out of the lane as possible. But instead, Steph stays on Domantas' high side, so when Draymond runs out to the corner, Domantas just slips right down underneath the basket. And so both of them messed up there. Steph shouldn't have died on the screen, and when he did, he should have peeled off onto Domantas Sabonis and tried to box him out of the lane. Draymond probably needs to be like, shit, Steph died on the screen. I'd rather give up a drifting jump shot for Kevin Huerter in the strong side corner than a layup, right? But that's not what happens. Steph and Draymond botch the coverage. Sabonis slips down the middle of the lane. He gets a wide open layup. The Kings go up by 1. On the final possession, and again, there was a lot of talk after the game about like, should Steve Kerr have called the timeout? And like, to me, again, when you focus on something like that, that to me is kind of missing the plot of a game that ends 134 to 133 or whatever, right? But like, here's the thing: there's pros and cons to both. If you call a timeout, you give the Kings a chance to game plan for you defensively. That means Mike Brown's probably going to sit down in the huddle and be like, how do we make sure Steph doesn't take this shot, right? So that probably ends in a double team and someone else shooting the ball anyway, right? But then the upside for the Warriors is they can be better organized. So for instance, like Jonathan Kuminga, when Steph got trapped and blitzed and was being dragged out to that like left side over by half court, Jonathan Kuminga was all the way in the right corner. And so like your second best offensive player on this particular night was in a position where he could do absolutely nothing to help you in that final possession. Whereas if Steve Kerr draws up the play, he probably draws it up in a way that involves a two-man game for Steph and Jonathan Kuminga, or Jonathan Kuminga is at least involved in some way, shape, or form, even maybe just as a decoy, right? So like that's the upside to potentially calling a timeout, right? But like there's a version of that where you call a timeout, you have JK set the ball screen, here comes the blitz. Steph does the exact same thing where he tries to use a between the legs retreat dribble to try to escape the blitz, and maybe he turns it over again, right? So like, to me, it's not really worth focusing on. And the whole point behind not calling a timeout is you're breeding chaos. And like, Steph is one of the best chaos players in the history of basketball. So like, if I was in that position as the coach of the team, I'm probably looking at that going, 6 or 7 seconds left. Steph has the ball, I think it was like 15, 20 seconds, whatever it was. But Steph has the ball. It's a chaotic environment. Like, I trust him, right? Like, if there's one thing you could say, it's like when Steph was sprinting away from that blitz, maybe then you look to call a timeout, just because in general, it's really difficult to, with 6 seconds left, get the ball out of a blitz without the pass getting tipped, or without the pass having to be super looping and then allowing a rotation, and then to somehow get a shot out of that, right? So like, if anything, he should have called a timeout after the blitz. But again, that's a split second set of circumstances. So again, I'm not really of the opinion that that's what should be focused on, but that ends up being how the Warriors lose the game in heartbreaking fashion, as Steph dribbles the ball off his foot and De'Aaron Fox runs down and, after the final buzzer, attempts a 360 windmill and gets rim stuffed. But excellent win for the Sacramento Kings. First time winning in Golden State in the regular season since 2020, which is crazy. And the Kings have been a little Jekyll and Hyde over the course of the last couple of months, but they are a really good team. De'Aaron Fox is one of the best players in the league, and especially that pull-up three-point shot has been the driving force of so much of his success this season.